Welcome to the 365 podcast with Shelly Smee as your host. That's me. And we are here with another Real Estate Finance Fridays with Lisa Mackie, who is a partner at Alexander Holburn. Lisa is known for her insight and expertise with real estate law, especially in the condo and strata property and Residential Tenancy Act. I'm going to let her explain what her passion is in the law. And welcome, Lisa. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for the invite, Shelly. I'm looking forward to it.
So, Strata Property Act, Residential Tenancy Act, could they change any more things all at once than what's happening right now in this space?
I know, it's been a whirlwind. Anybody who's been in this industry for the last couple of years can feel it. The change is sometimes overwhelming to keep up with. And the recent changes and the upcoming changes that are happening with our tenancy laws, if you are buying or selling rental properties, has been significant and will be significant. So lots to stay on top of.
Well, I'm sure it's going to provide a lot of billable hours for people in your realm. I know when I'm speaking with some of the lenders and the mortgage brokers, we're all just kind of scratching our heads because with the upcoming 4-month requirement for the purchaser's possession of the property, most pre-quals are maybe 90 days,
right,
or 120 days max. And certainly when I speak to some of my colleagues at BC REA, BC Real Estate Association, that actually help do the forms, the contracts of purchase and sale, the boilerplates, and then of course BCFSA, with the best interests of the public, with buyers, sellers, and tenants being the public. This is going to create some challenges for possession dates, for continuity of a practice standard. I mean, this is, I know there's always sort of the best intentions to try and alleviate, I'm going to say something political, to alleviate votes.
Yes.
In a certain sector, politicians and policies often come into place without necessarily all the chess moves being considered, in my opinion. But how do you see this from your standpoint, as either the advocate for a tenant or the advocate for a landlord? How are we going to navigate this?
Yeah.
How are we going to navigate this? Because even as it is, a landlord or a tenant, I think, has at least a 3 or 4 month waiting period just to get a hearing if they want to take something to the residential tenancy branch.
Yeah, I mean, Shelly, it's turned what we know about tenancy law and notice provisions on its head. And I'm going to shock you probably further by noting that even the bill that was passed, much of the new legislative change is yet to be prescribed by regulation. So there's a lot of we will see what happens. So we've been talking about, for example, increasing when the notice period for when a purchaser wants to move into the property that they've just purchased. Ordinarily, it was 2-month notice. There's the bill suggests it will be 4-month notice, but there's room in the bill, wiggle room, to say as prescribed. And so it's possible still. And my hope is that those that are drafting the regulations are listening to the feedback they're getting from the industry, that requiring a 4-month notice or significantly changing the manner with which these notices are issued, because one of the other changes that might impact a personal use of the purchaser is to get something called a generated notice from the branch. So actually going to a hearing or at least seeking branch approval first before issuing a 4-month notice, which completely alters the process and adds additional time. And then, of course, you have the time for the tenant to dispute the legitimacy of the notice at the end of the day. It is overwhelming, I think, for the industry to respond to that. So my hope is that when the regulations come later this summer, it will add some clarity and potentially the expression that you've just shared, which is how do we stay on top of this? Lenders are concerned about those rate hold periods and how do we respond to that? My hope is that the folks that are drafting are listening.
Well, I really hope so, because, as much as the media and the regulator, we kind of, as realtors, as sales agents, as buyers agents, listing agents, even in the commercial realm, we were all treated with the same swipe of the brush. And we're also seeing in the commercial realm right now, they are still deemed to have the same agency requirements as residential resale, which often just is not the way that commercial deals get put together. There's often a no agency side and an agency side. But from the point of view of residential tenancies, because we'll just leave the commercial side right out of it, because it really is a different realm. From the point of view of a residential tenancy, my concern is through the contract law. Our contracts for a purchase and sale are pretty boilerplate. They get vetted by the Bar Association. These things go through legal review. I know at Oakwyn, we have a lawyer on speed dial for situations where the boilerplate may just not cut it, and you have a situation where you need to get creative to bring the parties together within the the constraints of contract law, or within the enforceability of the contract. Is really, that's what we're worried about. We're worried that these vague terms, or these side doors or back doors or front doors, or however people are going to contract for possession and completion and adjustment dates, the 3 main dates in the contract of purchase and sale. You can't have like contingent clauses in a contract and still deem it to be enforceable under it's like a moving target. How can you say that this is enforceable if you have some contingent term in there that says, if this, then this? It makes for a lot of business for lawyers, and a lot of sleepless nights for buyers, sellers, realtors, and even for tenants. Like, it's not like I'm heartless, and it's not like I'm saying, okay, well, this is only good for one party. I don't think it's great for tenants either. It just puts a lot of uncertainty in every party's mind when a property is being sold of that is a tenanted property. What are these expectations, and how can we act, and how can we, if they haven't even passed them into law, because that's what I'm understanding you're saying by they've have it more as like a proposal of what we intend to do, as opposed to here is the act and we are changing the act, and the act is a law, and therefore because the law now says this, we will do this. Like, that's not even the realm right now, right? We're just dealing with a sort of suggested approach to this whole situation.
I think
correct understanding that it's not passed into it hasn't been put into the actual act yet to change the law.
Yeah, well, a lot of it is going to be developed by regulation, which comes later. So the enactment, the bill, has already passed. So that received royal assent in May. But much of the bill, I've never seen in my 16 years of practicing in this area a bill that was passed with as much deference to what will be coming in the regulation to give explanation to the legislative change. So the number of times, I did a little bit of a search today on the bill, how many times the word prescribed is used, which means that it will come into clarity by regulation, which comes later. It's kind of like a companion to the act. And there's 49 references to prescribed in this bill, which to me is unheard of. And I think we're all looking at a bit of crystal ball gazing. So we can see the
Right.
news releases that have come out that forecast that the 4-month notice will apply to landlords going forward when they want to use the property for personal use, requiring landlords to apply to the branch and use a web portal in order to get clearance to issue those eviction notices. We see a forecasting there, but the bill itself as drafted doesn't give us any certainty. And in this market, and Shelly, I mean, your reaction is the same as mine. Certainty is key, and for a lawyer even to help counsel individuals through this process and what might or might not happen, it's a dice roll. I mean, we will see what the regulations say in terms of the 4-month notice requirement, whether or not purchasers will have that 4-month notice requirement, because there's still wiggle room in the bill to suggest that 2 months might still be applicable to some of the grounds for eviction. So we shall see. 4 months seems a bit onerous for a sale of a property rather than an existing owner wanting to move into a property.
Right, repossession or and then they'll probably jig around with the notice for substantial renovation or the notice upon demolition, because those two notices are quite different now than they were even 2 years ago as well.
Yeah, the significant repair and renovation one, that got a huge facelift a couple of years ago, where you have to apply to the branch for permission to evict for those reasons. Before, you used to be able to issue an eviction notice on the basis that
I think you have to have your demolition permit or building permit in hand when you make the submission.
Yeah, so for demolition, you basically have to establish that all permits and approvals required by law are in place before you issue that eviction notice, which is really the critical component, the critical step, because what I find that unfortunately, a lot of folks that ring my phone, and I've never called with good news. No one's ever saying, "Hey, Lisa, I had a great experience with my tenant," or "I had a great experience on this transaction." It's always something that goes sideways. And more often than not, it's because at the very early stages of crafting the eviction notice, steps weren't taken to ensure they were in a position to actually issue the notice. And now we're waiting months for a hearing, and which will eventually restart the process again. So it could be quite a headache.
Headaches all the way around.
Yeah.
My head's exploding. So one of the things that the context that I think is also especially difficult right now is I'm not currently acting managing broker at Oakwyn Realty. I did step away last fall to take a little sabbatical and actually write another course for the real estate board, because I am known as an expert buyer's agent, and wrote that course. But managing brokers are pulling their hair out.
Yeah.
And, when a lot of the educational and professional development courses are around selling tenant occupied properties, we can't even update our materials.
Yeah.
If we can't counsel our peers and our realtors on what direction to take, and I'm talking to you, one of the top experts in this whole field, that's why we're not transacting right now. People keep saying to me, "Oh, the market's so weird. The market is full of uncertainty for particular classes of property that are investment properties. Nobody wants to even make any assumptions that they are going to be able to have a closing where the property is going to change a tenant right now. Nobody wants the uncertainty. Nobody wants the liability of selling or buying when a tenant is in place, which is really unfortunate for the tenant. But that's, when people say to me, why are condos staying on the market for 40, 50 days right now? Well, if it says it's tenanted, like, there's your answer.
Yeah. And it's a
And
challenge to the tenants too, right?
it's not freeing up the so-called supply or the
Mm.
so-called, it's not creating more opportunities for people to put supply for tenants into the stream. And
Yeah, well,
it
it's not
seems,
very inviting for sure. I mean,
no,
to
and it
invite
seems
more
to
rental
me
housing stock, definitely.
that's a sort of, it's an oxymoronic way to somehow stimulate the the supply of rental housing by making anybody who could possibly be an investor not want to be an investor,
Mm.
because I've had a few sales over the last 2 years where people are like, oh, I finally saved up enough, I don't have to be a tenant ever again, because being a tenant is hell as well.
Definitely.
So
Definitely.
it's like, I know you and I are not going to solve the housing crisis in 20 minutes, but like,
Pressure's on. Yeah.
the pressure's on. Like, you feel for both sides of the coin here. But it's, these types of regulations don't seem to actually stimulate what they're supposed to be helping. And that's kind of my frustration with a lot of these changes. Do you
Yeah.
mostly serve the in the landlord side,
Yeah.
or
Most of my practice is landlord focused. So
right?
landlord, rental managers, realtors. I do take the occasional tenant case, usually um, uh, on a basis that there has been some absolute wrong, and it makes
Egregious kind of
yeah.
landlord behavior that needs to be championed for.
Yeah, yeah, and so I'm happy to get involved there. It's a lot, rarer for a tenant to engage a lawyer in the process, and as you can expect, it can be very expensive, going
Mhm.
to court or going to the branch, and so, but certainly, I mean, I've looked at both sides of the fence, and I can say in the face of the rapid changes that we've seen to that act, everybody's head spinning. So I can say that that's a consistent industry response, not just from landlords and rental managers and listing agents, but from the occupants of those properties as well, who are also looking for certainty and some direction too.
Cool. Well, I'm going to do a little bit of a pivot here.
Sure.
I often get clients who are reading Strata minutes asking me, what's a civil tribunal?
Oh,
Do you ever do those?
we do. So it's called the Civil Resolution Tribunal, the
Right.
CRT.
Okay.
And
And it comes into stratas when people can't, like, live together in harmony. Or give us an idea of a sort of scenario of people acting like crazy humans, because to me
sure.
that's what it often is, right?
Yeah, often when people ask me what I do, I say neighbor fights, because that's predominantly what happens, right? People, and it got worse during the pandemic because everyone was cooped
Oh
up in
my
their
god,
house.
they had nothing else to do but
That's
bitch
right.
about their neighbor's cat or pooping in their balcony
Wherever,
flower
yeah.
box or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, so the Civil Resolution Tribunal, that's been up and running for several years now. But it's what's unique about it is it's an online tribunal only. So people litigate from their computer, from their smartphones, and one of the categories of disputes that they preside over are strata disputes. So there is a limited. Um, kind of strata disputes that they can decide. More often than not, just to give you an example, would be a bylaw enforcement matter. So somebody has brought in, for example, a pet contrary to pet bylaw or pet prohibition. And then the aggrieved party, whether or not it's the strata trying to enforce the bylaw or the owner trying to resist a fine or decision of the council to remove the animal, that might spill over into the civil resolution tribunal. And the key is civil. We want to keep things civil as much as possible, which could be a challenge when people are litigating remotely. I think people are a lot freer with using capital letters and exclamation points when when they're behind a computer screen.
Is it not like a Zoom courtroom? Is that like, or
no,
is it? No, it isn't.
You don't get to see anybody, Shelly. So it is all written submission only. And so, absent somebody sending a photograph in, you never really get to see anybody as part of the process. And
I thought it was like a Zoom. I thought it was like a Zoom court.
No, not at all. And lawyers are banned at the outset. So by default, everybody has to be self-represented. And you can get
this is why we needed to have you on today. I was just assuming it was like Zoom court. I know as a managing broker, there were a few times that I was in mediation, which was a completely different ball of wax.
Yes.
And a mediator was basically, trying to solve stuff before things go further in the legal realm. But usually it was a mediator, the lawyer from E&O, and then the two parties that are potentially having a lawsuit. But the civil thing, it's like basically like a textathon to sort it out.
That's not a bad idea. Or bad description, because there's actually character limits for what you can write in your submission. So it's a very different way to litigate. The idea was it was supposed to make disputes that were otherwise inaccessible and would be blocked from going to Supreme Court because of cost and expense more accessible to the average person. And so one of the categories of disputes that was shuttled into that area is, of course, neighbor fights, because trying to get the court's interest on your cat poop scenario is a lot tougher when you're competing with cases on, for example, custody disputes or something perceived as being a bit more serious.
The family. You were smart. You're like, no way, I'm not going into family law.
Well, this sort of is, it's funny. I do say, because of the high emotion involved with housing, that it is like family law with housing. So it's the equivalent. Like, your neighbors are kind of the family that you might not have asked for.
Okay.
There's that piece too.
Cool. So in the strata realm, when we talk about stratas, the presentation that you did for industry a few months ago where we met, one of the things that keeps coming up that seems like it's going to be a big problem moving forward is this electrical survey study.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe that's in the realm of green things that aren't necessarily legal things, but what's coming to light for a lot of the, say, 20-year and older stratas that didn't have the forethought or the requirement of this type of electrical infrastructure is they're going to be legislated to have an electrical survey or capacity report, I guess, done for EV charging. In some of the cases that I've heard of out in industry, the stratas are going to have to pay the city, the municipality that they live in, to bring more charge into their actual building to be able to build capacity for this electrical. And to me, that just sounds like a whole bunch of finger pointing, legal, jurisdictional issues coming down the road for stratas. Because on the one hand, the government's saying we want you to have this. Is it a statutory requirement for a report, or is it just a mild suggestion?
Yeah, electrical planning reports are a thing. And the problem is and we're still waiting on regulations for that as well. And so when one of the big concerns is whether or not the industry will actually be able to supply the demand that will be needed for these assessments. So can our community actually even support? Does it have electrical capacity to support electrical charging stations or vehicle stations? And then stratas are grappling with, well, what happens if we've already approved a few before these legislative amendments came through? Do we have to hold the same standard when somebody else wants to install an EV charging station? So a lot of question marks there. And I think, again, it's a bit of a crystal ball gaze to see what the regulations will say. And I can say, Shelly, the amendments that have happened across Strata and across Tenancy, a lot of this has been, we have to wait and see for the regulations, because the regulations operate in tandem with the act. I always say, like, an act or the statute is like the vehicle, and the regulations are like the parts. It's what makes the vehicle run. So you can't understand one without the other. And this is going to be a huge, I think, a huge issue and a question mark for a lot of communities in terms of how much they need to invest in this, whether they can actually do this, how to equitably distribute power, and people's request for access to EV charging. I mean, stay tuned. I mean, this has been a bumpy ride already in the last couple of years.
Well, what I'm hearing colloquially, if that's the correct way to put it, is that we need another Site C dam if this is even going to happen. I mean, how are you actually going to get the grid of the infrastructure in municipalities that in many cases are stretched to the max already to suddenly have extra energy resources and requirements in, say, buildings? I mean, it's one thing I'm in a 22 unit building that's 22 years old. We did one of these studies because a couple people said, hey, let's put in like 3 EV stations, and between all of us, we'll just share them. And when we got the report back from the company that did it, they said, they went over the top, in our opinion, and said, oh, well, this is what it'll cost everybody to have a spot. And it's like, that's not what we want. They said, well, we're proactively saving you money on a report that you're going to need in the future anyway. Even though we only wanted 3 spots, they gave us a report based on how much it would cost our 22 unit strata to put in an EV charger at everybody's parking spot. And it was going to be close to $100,000.
Wow.
And then they said, now the issue is where you are in your municipality, the grid can only supply X. And it looks like the municipalities are going to request that the strata actually pay to upgrade to the line to get you more power into your building. So to me, I don't know, that just sounds like a bunch of false economy for this requirement that people have electric vehicles, which I think is ridiculous. I grew up in a mining. I grew up in a mining household. My dad's in mining, and specifically in metals. The world does not have enough minerals.
Right. Yes.
Like, for what it takes to actually build and run an electrical vehicle, it's great, I think, for infrastructure vehicles like buses and things that are like high volume usage. But for every individual to have an electrical vehicle, we just don't have the commodities in copper, all the different metals that go into the batteries and that go into building these cars, the catalytic converters, or the actual, that's not the word for it. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent now, but it's just, to me, it just is another one of these examples of putting the cart before the horse as far as creating legislation that the downstream effects aren't really sensible for for
It's tough, right?
the green economy that we want to have is actually, it's greenwashing in my opinion, because the actual requirements of Mother Earth to have everyone driving around in an electrically charged vehicle is just not possible.
Well,
Anyway.
we even have, I mean, to your point too, I mean, we have municipalities across the province that will regularly experience brownouts, particularly during the summer with use of air conditioning, etc. Air conditions are units, another issue that the stratas are grappling with, particularly
Yes.
during the heat waves. But no, I
And
think
heat
it's
pump. And heat
definitely,
pump.
yeah,
Like, hello,
yeah.
you're going to retroactively have a 300 unit building have 300 heat pumps or more all of a sudden when it wasn't built that way?
Yeah, it's funny. I see that there's a thread with a lot of these changes, which is sort of best laid plans. Like the goals, we look at the goals of the change,
Mm-hmm.
they're often very important goals. Like, for example, we want to maintain rental housing stock. We want to make sure that good landlords are available and that tenants don't lose their housing absent very, specialized reasons. Or we want strata communities to plan for electrical capacity. We want them to plan for their depreciation reports and investing in their building and budgeting for that. But for the average Joe, for the average strata council member, for the average property owner, these types of amendments and the pace with which we've experienced them has been overwhelming. And so I always say just sort of stay tuned to see what happens in the fall as well. What more is on the way, Shelly? I don't know.
I know. I don't know if I can. I mean, we always have the capacity for more, apparently. That's what my grandma said. You never get sent more than you can handle. And sometimes I'm like, I think you're wrong. I feel like, I put my lipstick on, I got ready for work, because that was another one of her things. Doesn't matter how you're feeling, just get ready and go. Just
Okay.
get ready and get out the door. Which is great advice, I guess, from back in the war or whatever. But I do feel like we're kind of at a crossroads of, I don't know, this might be a political question you don't want to answer,
Okay.
but when laws like this get passed, or any law, because I'm not a lawyer, but I like to quasi think that I'm somewhat intelligent. When these laws get passed and say governments change, have you ever seen retroactively a new regime strike down something that's already been enacted?
No, not in my realm. No. So,
No,
or even to walk back something that's been passed. No, that's
right.
not to say that that's not a possibility. But certainly that's not been my experience in 16 years.
No,
So,
no, it's sort of like taxes. They're never going to take
right.
taxes away. It's all just juggling the books to make it look a little different.
Right.
Yeah. So, what are some of the other things that you're passionate about in your practice, or
Oh,
even in
goodness.
life? It doesn't just necessarily have to be all like
Oh,
Susie business
sure.
here.
Oh no, so actually, so I will sort of share a fun fact that I think a lot of people still don't realize, but they do when they encounter her. Is I have a twin sister, and she's a lawyer as well. She practices in the area of labor and employment. We actually just did a conference together last week where we talked about an overlapping topic. Um,
Did you wear the same outfit to
we
really
did
mess with
not, Shelley.
people?
We did not. But was that debated in terms of preparation? Absolutely. I mean, do you really twin it up? That was the question. But no, we had a lot of fun with that. But I think, like, for me, in terms of what I love doing, and this is probably why I chose this particular practice area, because when you go to law school, you study a whole variety of different areas. And actually, the area that I practice in now was not even a course in law school. I found this when I was called to the bar and became a lawyer. But is that people element is meeting with people and having an involvement in something that's so integral to people's everyday life. And so for me, housing really clicked. For my sister, it was employment and jobs. And so it was interesting that we both went into the legal profession, but we chose independently different fields that have a lot of things in common as well.
That's really cool. That's funny. So, being a twin, did you guys go to the same law school as well? Did you get to pull any of those tricks on your profs?
My sister went to UVic and I went to UBC. We did change places when we were in elementary school. So that was something that we tried and failed. She had a pop quiz in one of her classes, and I did not perform very well.
Whoop. We lost Lisa. I'm not quite sure why. It could be that the internet connection was a little unstable. That was a great place to have a segue for an ending. I really appreciate that Lisa came on the call today. And I know she's a very busy lady, so I will call that for the episode today for the Pursuit 365 podcast, Real Estate and Finance Fridays. If you like this podcast or you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or make some notes in the chat. We do monitor it, and please like and subscribe. Thank you for joining us today.